No problem. All right, so my name is Catherine Hazelton, and I worked with Future of California Elections when I was at the James Irvine Foundation, which I left a couple of years ago and started a consulting business working with nonprofits and foundations and policymakers on strategic and program planning, and have had the distinct pleasure during that time be working with FoCE on the Voters' Choice Act, and specifically on the Voters' Choice California, a coalition that FoCE is sponsoring. So I want to start today by providing just a few of the basics about the Voters' Choice Act. You can see the PowerPoint here that Voters' Choice California has created that any of you are welcome to use. This is entirely open source, can be rebranded by anyone in this room or anyone that you work with to talk about the Voters' Choice Act. The first message that we share with folks is really what we see as essential to the Voters' Choice Act, which is that you choose how, when, and where you vote. The voter is in the driver's seat here. So the Voters' Choice Act became law in 2016, and this year in 2018, it is it's getting its road test in 5 counties that volunteered to try it out: Madera, Napa, Nevada, San Mateo, and Sacramento counties. In 2020, any county in California can choose to adopt the model if they like. We're hearing that LA is quite intrigued and expect it to go into other counties in 2020 as well. So we're all really in a testing and learning mode this year, which will, I think, influence what a lot of the counties choose to do in 2020. So I'm going to skip past this for time. So one of the most important things to know about the Voters' Choice Act is that it provides voters with many options for how they choose to vote. Traditional polling places, for the most part, will not exist in the same way, but voters are going to have a whole number of options for how they vote. First of all, every voter is going to receive a ballot in the mail, regardless of whether they've asked for one or not. They'll have the option to either return that ballot by mail, return it to a ballot drop box within their county, or to go to a vote center. And Michelle, I'm seeing we have a little mistake on our PowerPoint here. We'll fix that. That's supposed to be vote center. So let's go forward. So any voter can mail their ballot back by mail, and voters with disabilities will be able to use accessible technology to mark their ballots at home. Voters will be able to access drop boxes, which are going to be placed all over the county. These might be in front of Target, where I would be most likely to drop a ballot, or anywhere else in the county. And these are being located all throughout counties. No postage required to use a ballot drop box. Voters can also access vote centers. Some vote centers will be open for 4 days, including Election Day. Others will be open for up to 11 days leading up to Election Day. This includes the weekends before elections. And voters can access any vote center in their county, where they work, where they live, where they drop off their kids for school. Any vote center in the county they can go to vote in person. They can register to vote there and vote the same day. They can vote in multiple languages. Well, I think you just get to pick the one in which you vote. You don't get to vote multiple ballots, but you can choose which of multiple languages and vote using an accessible voting machine. So those are some of the basics about the Voters' Choice Act. We're going to get into a lot more details here today. I just wanted to give a little note about Voters' Choice California. This is the project that Future of California Elections put together. It is community groups working with the counties, working with campaigns, working with everyone who's in this space of contacting voters to help implement the Voters' Choice Act in those counties. We've got a statewide coalition and local hubs in each of the counties that are implementing. We've also created, with the help of the James Irvine Foundation, a grant-making program where more than 20 organizations throughout the 5 counties and statewide have received grants to help educate their communities about the Voters' Choice Act. To date, the Voters' Choice California has led efforts to help coordinate translations of materials, launched the grants program, and developed a set of materials, both for election administrators to use and for any organization or leader in a community that's contacting voters. These include PowerPoint, and this PowerPoint goes on with basically anything that anyone can, I'm not going to go through it, but that anyone can pick up and use to educate their community about the Voters' Choice Act. We also have fact sheets that are currently in English and Chinese. These were developed in partnership with the Secretary of State's office. They are going to be in all of the covered languages. There's frequently asked questions, all sorts of tools for election administrators, like checklists of everything that needs to get done to comply with the law. And one of the recent products that came out is a sample text tool where we worked with a whole bunch of advocates together to figure out what are the best ways to talk about the Voters' Choice Act. What are the words that make the most sense to voters? What's the plain language way to talk about this? What are the messages that voters most need to hear? And we created that in a format so that it can just be cut and paste into anything that you're creating, whether it's email messages, whether it's postcards to your voters, whether it's your campaign and you're creating text scripts or walk scripts. So we've got tools like that available on the Voters' Choice California website. I'm now going to turn this over to our first speaker, who I think now is Greg. And Greg I'm so pleased that he's joining us today from Nevada, one of the mighty five, the five pioneers, the brave counties that are moving forward. And just a bit about Greg. He is the clerk recorder registrar of voters in Nevada County. Nevada poached him from San Francisco, where he was for many years, helping run elections there. He was elected president of the County Recorders Association of California in December 2015, just finished up a 2-year term. We appreciate his leadership throughout the state and in Nevada County, and are excited to learn about how implementation is going in his county.
Thank you. Hey, good afternoon. Thank you. I was going to finish a PowerPoint this afternoon, but I don't have much time. And Astrid sent me some questions, so I huddled up with my staff, and I'd like to go over the questions and some of the answers for the group. What are some of the unexpected challenges of VCA implementation? I have 3 bullet points here we came up with. Keeping committee meetings on topic so we get useful feedback during them and time is not wasted. In Nevada County, initial committee meetings were inundated with questions about voter fraud and cybersecurity. Next week, we're having another committee meeting, and we're trying to field answers to the Stormy Daniel questions that are going to come, which I know they're going to come, but it's important to keep the committee on focus. 2, initial startup costs were hard for the board to stomach. Now, I'm keeping the board in touch every step of the way in terms of the fiscal impact, in terms of the money we need to spend. So I'm thinking during my board hearing, getting some additional funds, no problem. Spoke with all of them, thought we had an agreement. But the first board meeting was a little rough. Frankly, I got skewered. Second board meeting, I got my money. But that was a little unexpected. Third bullet, the January mock election uncovered an issue with our EMS that required significant changes to the system before it would facilitate vote center operations. A mock election was very useful for us. Things came up. I'm glad we went through the process. We're getting some issues fixed. But again, it was an unexpected challenge. Second question, what are 3 factors needed for successful implementation of the VCA? Right away, I have to give you a disclaimer. We haven't fully implemented the VCA, so we can't determine success yet. However, we have 3 factors we came up with. Communicating and cooperating with the community to keep them involved in the planning process through the election administration plan is critical. Really make an effort to get a sizable attendance at the initial committee meetings so that you can get the pulse of how your communities feel about particular elements of your planning and adjust accordingly. If you have your community's support behind your plan and you follow code, you'll have a concrete foundation to adopt the new model. 2, begin planning a year in advance, like us. It may be helpful, depending on the county, to have relatively accurate monetary estimates early on. 3, get feedback on your planning early on from other counties in the same situation. Early on, Nevada County benefited from being part of a working group that consisted of other counties also planning implementation of the VCA. Third question, what are the most essential elements of successful voter education campaign? In Nevada County, we plan on reaching many demographics as possible through our advertising. We chose media outlets based upon who their audiences are to ensure we're reaching a spread of residents throughout our county. It's important to keep messaging clear and concise. You'll want to educate voters based upon what questions you think will be common within your community come election time. The more educated your voters are, the smaller the lines will be at the vote centers and less phone calls we'll have to answer. We also want voters and non-voters to understand that voting is easy and convenient to increase turnout. Last question. Flash forward to 2020. What advice would you have for a new county implementing the VCA for community organizations? Plan far in advance, get feedback from your community at regular intervals. I need to catch a plane. Thank you very much. And thank you, organizers. It's been a wonderful day. Very good conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you stretching out your time with us to be here right now. Our next panelist is James Schwab, who many of you know as the Deputy Secretary of State for Policy and Planning. He used to be a legislative staffer working on many of these same issues that we all hold dear. And prior to that, worked on a number of campaigns for local legislative and city council races. He previously received an undergraduate degree in international relations at UC Davis. Go Aggies! Right? One thing I just want to note about James is that he is a true public servant. He is one of the most collaborative people in government that I've ever been exposed to, and is, I mean, really perfect as a friend to FoCE, because that's what we're all about here, is working together, and we couldn't have a better champion of that than James. He also has exceptional socks, and I don't know if you all have seen these Tapatio salsa socks, hot sauce socks, but they're really great. To our true public servant, James.
So I'm going to go over some observations from my time looking at all 5 counties and their implementation of the VCA. So while my title is Deputy Secretary of State Policy and Planning, my focus is the Voters' Choice Act. And specifically, my first observation is my real role is relationship counselor or manager of personalities. There are a lot of people interested, obviously, in the rollout of the Voters' Choice Act, from election officials to legislators to community groups to local elected officials, and managing those personalities, working with them, getting them to communicate, to get along, is, I think, my top job, and what's ended up being actually a pretty fun re-entry back into the field after 10 years just doing legislative work. I think I'm kind of uniquely positioned to do some of that work. I started off as an activist with the ACLU. I was on their Northern California board for a number of years. Did a lot of protests and marches, and then I got sucked into the establishment doing legislative work. So I've straddled both worlds, and I'm trying to make it work. So a couple more observations. A couple reminders too is the VCA, the Voters' Choice Act, is not perfect. It's our first attempt. It's a collection of policies that are based on compromise and limited information. We spent about 3 to 4 years researching the best practices that we wanted to bring to California. We worked with the county election officials. We worked with the Future of California Elections to identify what could work in California, what should it look like in California. Colorado might have its own model, Wisconsin might have its own model, but how do we make it work here? For a year and a half, we sat down together, we negotiated with the legislature, we negotiated with each other, and we came up with the Voters' Choice Act. It's a sausage. Might not be even the best sausage, but it's a sausage, but it's our best attempt. So think about the Voters' Choice Act as the first act that we need to come back and revisit and improve upon as we move forward. Second, as Greg alluded to, we have to remember that we live in a world of limited resources. Elections receive no ongoing funding from the state or the federal government. County governments have other competing priorities: healthcare services, public safety, housing, homelessness, that receive funding ahead of election officials. As Greg up here was implementing the Voters' Choice Act, has a staff in the single digits. I think they all left, actually. But single digit staff for an elections office. Election officials oftentimes share IT staff with other county departments. So you have to remember that election officials are doing the best with what they have because they're often the last to be funded. So when we ask them to do more, they have to choose other things to do. And so that's one of the philosophies behind the Voters' Choice Act, is how do we get early voting, same-day registration within the limited resources that county election officials operate with. Another observation is you have to remember that we are all specialists. We all bring to the table very unique skill sets and backgrounds. We oftentimes think we know more than we do, but in the end, we're just a group of specialists that need each other to succeed. If we want the Voters' Choice Act to work, succeed, if we want other voter reforms to succeed, we have to listen to each other's specialties, understand and recognize each other's specialties, and listen and learn from each other. We also need to remember the spirit of the future California elections and why we're all in the room here today. You're here today because you want to increase voter registration and voter participation. You want to increase the integrity of our elections and improve our democracy and strengthen our democracy. Is there anyone here who disagrees with that? No, we all have the same goal. We may have different strategies, perspectives, or takes, but we're trying to achieve the same thing. We must remember that. Oftentimes when we get into the weeds of specific policies and questions, we lose that perspective. And we put our shields up and we bring our swords out. We have to keep remembering that we're all here with the same goal. Another lesson I learned is we can build it, but they might not come. We can require counties to have voting accessibility advisory committees, language accessibility advisory committees. We can require them to have public consultations and public hearings. And we can all do our best to do outreach and flyer and emails, and no one shows up. And my observation is this is a unique new request we're making of the public. And that's to give us feedback on how they want their elections to be run, where they want their vote centers. It's a new process, and the community is not quite sure that they have anything to provide. So I think we need to do a lot more work for this is my advice to the 2020 counties, is getting the community, getting the public ready to provide that feedback. I think even like in Sacramento County, I think has a really good example of a working hub, working coalition of groups from the City of Sacramento Mayor's office to on-the-ground groups like PICO. They have a great coalition, but it took 6 to 8 months to get off the ground and running. So when we're thinking ahead to the future, we need a longer runway to get people engaged in the public process that is required by the VCA. Another observation is it's overwhelming. There is so much to do. There is a lot to change. There's a lot that as advocates and civil rights groups we see on the outside getting the public ready for educating them, getting them to understand what changes are coming. There's even more changes internally that the counties are dealing with. They're moving from one model to a completely new model, and how you train your staff, what staff now does what. Election day processes you've been used to for 30 years are now changing. So we have to remember that there's a lot going on. And so the way I kind of look at it, the three ways I break up all the work that we're doing is we try to look at how do we improve election administration. That's the internal workings that the counties deal with on a day-to-day basis year round. That changes under the Voters' Choice Act. So as we go forward, we have to look at that silo. How do we improve election administration? The other side of it is public education and getting out the vote. How does that change under the Voters' Choice Act? How do we educate the public about these new options? And the third part is looking to the future. So as we're working on implementation, I think we're identifying different spots in the laws and regulations that could use some improvement. So making note of those, how do we change, what do we do to and improve the laws, improve the regulations, and ID the best practices going into 2020 and beyond. And lastly, I want to, my observation, because no one's really talked about it at all when we talk about Voters' Choice Act implementation. I don't even think it was talked about today, but it's buried in the Voters' Choice Act. I think it's, to me, one of the most subversive, cool things in there that counties are going to probably throw a rock at me once I remind them of it, is the Voters' Choice Act requires counties to contemplate how they're going to close gaps and disparities in voter turnout and voter registration. Let that sink in. We're requiring election officials to contemplate how they're going to close the gap in disparities in voter turnout and education. That's pretty awesome. And that's one thing we'll have to look at going forward after 2018 is what did we learn? What communities maybe didn't turn out as high as we wanted them to? County election officials are going to be required to look at that and analyze that data and figure out how they're going to adjust. And that's another way we can support them and work with them to identify ways to do that. Those are some of my observations on the rollout of the Voters' Choice Act. It's a bumpy road, but we're getting there. This is a brand new thing we're all going through together. And my final reminder, final observation, again, we're all in this together. Can we all say that one time? We're all in this together. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Our next speaker on this panel is Dora Rose, who is the Deputy Director of the League of Women Voters of California. I think that the way I can best sum up Dora is that she is a woman who gets things done. Melissa is her boss and can attest to that. And Dora has achieved so much in this space. Many projects that we've talked about here today, what Tina Chisnell was talking about in relation to voter testing and usability of voter guides, helping lead that work with them from the League of Women Voters. She's spearheaded the League's work with MapLight around Voters Edge California, and done tremendous work related to implementation of the Voters' Choice Act, including really helping to seed some of those partnerships in Nevada County, in San Mateo County, and in Napa County, and bringing the community together to help inform the process. I'm delighted to turn it over to Dora.
All right, this is my clicker. I just want to make sure I know how to use this. Forward? Okay. So, I don't know if this, is this picking me up? It's funny how similar what I'm about to say is to what Jay, it's like we've got some sort of a mind meld happening here. So, I am planning to briefly introduce, before we sort of get to questions, the Voters' Choice California Coalition, the collaborative work that we're doing with community-based organizations and with elections officials, work that we're doing to ensure the success of the Voters' Choice Act, and to ensure that it increases voter participation overall, but in particular increases voter participation among underrepresented groups. But I thought I'd take a few moments and give a little bit of background, sort of some context as to how I'm approaching this work. Before coming to California in 2012, I was a voting rights lawyer in Ohio. And for those of you who are unfamiliar or maybe unfamiliar with the electoral situation in Ohio, it basically looks like this. No joke. Brutal, bloody political warfare. It is a partisan free-for-all there where people can't even agree on fundamental principles. We were fighting naked partisan voter suppression. And that was my life, right? It was ugly. Then I moved to California. Right. Winning, right? Everyone seems to be working to make elections more accessible here. It was incredible. Innovation flourishes in Ohio. California. We're a model for other states. And interestingly, we are a model for other states that seem to be doing pro-democracy movements, which is something we never really thought would have to happen in this country, but it is, and we're a model for them. I worried, actually, when I moved here. Don't worry, less than 5 minutes. When I moved here, there wouldn't be any meaningful work for me to do, right? Voting rights lawyer, nirvana, what was I going to do? It didn't take long, though, for me to realize that it's not all unicorns and rainbows here in California, not all ice cream and kisses. There is a reason that we are doing this work. Chief among the reasons is our extraordinary vast disparity in participation among different communities, right? And so Latinx eligible voters, Asian American eligible voters are voting at much lower rates than essentially white voters here in California. In this majority minority state, this nirvana, this is a moral issue, right? And we need to fix it. It is a deeply unrepresentative democracy. So the Voters' Choice Act is one of those innovations that I'm talking about. It's designed not only to remove impediments to voting in general for everybody, to make it more convenient, but to very self-consciously, as James was talking about, very self-consciously engage underrepresented voters in that process. And when I say engage, I mean really engage from soup to nuts. So the law requires that underrepresented voters be engaged initially in the actual development of the election administration plans in each county. Very unusual, very, very rare sort of a statutory structure, all the way through to voter education and outreach. In a very self-conscious way. So the Voters' Choice Coalition is built on the premise that the law's potential for success is really enhanced by these sort of cross-sector collaborations among elections officials, the Secretary of State's office, community-based organizations. Oops, our pretty pictures. Wait a minute. Did I? All right. Yeah. Yeah, these are like a lot of people in the room right here. Where's? Oh. Okay. You saw all the other pictures, right? My rainbows? Okay. All right. So we work to build these relationships. Voters' Choice California Coalition, this coalition, among all of the stakeholders, right? Those connections that we're developing are really important. They're the connections that allow you to pick up the phone and have a hard conversation, right? When there are disagreements and concerns, you can cut through the bureaucracy if you have those kinds of relationships that both Voters' Choice California Coalition and FoCE in general is fostering. So what we do, we offer our technical assistance. The members of the coalition have very diverse fields of expertise, right? We have people who are experts in language access. Jonathan Stein's in the audience right over there. We have people who are experts in disability access. Fred may still be here, Paul Spencer. We have people who are experts like me from the League of Women Voters in civic engagement generally. We offer technical assistance both to community-based organizations and to the elections officials. And perhaps most significantly, what we really try to do is to mine that deep, rich vein of community engagement that is built into the law and make sure that it is extricated in a real and meaningful way, that it actually happens and that the community is listened to and that the input is paid attention to. So, ultimately what's so different between Ohio and California is that in California, everyone's pulling in the same direction, just like James was saying. It's funny, I was listening to James and I was like, oh my God, it's the same talking points I've got. But I guess that makes sense, right? We're all pulling in the same direction. Our order of priorities may not be the same, right? Our focuses may diverge. The pressures on elections offices are really different than the pressures on, Voters' Choice California. They have a lot of things a lot of balls in the air. So we may disagree on how to reach our goals, but in the end, we all want a stronger democracy. And that's what makes these collaborations really work in a place like California, where it's all rainbows and unicorns.
Great. All right, our last speaker for this panel, I'm going to introduce, but first I just want to note again that we do have index cards on the table if you'd like to ask a question to this panel. Stephanie, where are you? Stephanie's right there. She'll be going around picking up index cards. So we'll start taking those. Stephanie, I'd welcome those at any time. Okay, our last speaker for this panel is Jenny Ocon, and I'm afraid, did I say that? Yes, okay. Jenny Ocon is Executive Director of the Up Valley Family Centers in Napa County. Napa, as you know, is one of our 5 VCA counties. The Up Valley Family Centers resulted from a merger of 2 rural family resource centers in the county. She's been working with nonprofits there and throughout the Bay Area for the last 20 years. And she's currently working closely with a number of other organizations in Napa County through the Community Leaders Coalition to support the full participation of underserved communities in elections, and in particular through the rollout of the Voters' Choice Act. We've been delighted with the work that they have been conducting in Napa, and I'm so pleased to bring up Jenny.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This has been a fascinating day for me. And this has been an interesting journey for our organization to be involved with the Voters' Choice Act in Napa County. I have to say, about a year ago, I wouldn't have predicted I would be here talking with you, but I wanted to share with you our story of involvement, how we got involved, because I think as you're thinking about the impact and bringing on this into your counties, thinking about how you connect with community-based organizations it's interesting, and you can try, as James mentioned earlier, you can put the call out, but not necessarily are they going to come when you call. I think in our case, there were situations that brought us together, and so I want to share that with you. So the Up Valley Family Centers, we serve about 3,000 people each year, from babies to seniors. The vast majority of people that we serve are Spanish speakers. We also serve a very large senior population in our communities, and we're in a rural community, so we're at the northern end of Napa County. At the southern end of our county is American Canyon, a bedroom community to the Bay Area, a large Filipino population. A lot of working class families live there, and then Napa is right in the middle. So we actually got into this work through this thing called the Community Leaders Coalition, which was formed in January of 2017. There were several of our community-based organizations that got together. We're asking each other are you hearing a lot of concerns and fear in the community around possible changes to federal policy, for example, around immigration or around the Affordable Care Act, things that our constituents, the people that we serve, care about on a daily basis? And we just felt like there was a lot of questions and misinformation or rumors or things that people were wanting to come together around. We didn't know if there was something that we could work on together, but we felt like we're going to get ourselves together and talk through, is there something that we can do to help provide the community with accurate information about what's actually happening around, you name the issue. There were a lot of them going on, and there still are. We called meetings, and not only were nonprofits there, but a lot of government partners, churches, faith-based groups, grassroots groups, and we had some conversation that was very organic that resulted in a few activities, including making some presentations before the Board of Supervisors that we were concerned about. And through that process, we really identified we need to do more to build civic engagement in our community and understanding and awareness of the systems that serve people and how people can get involved and make a difference. And particularly our underrepresented communities. And so it just happened that at one of there's another coalition that is involved in health, and there was a presentation about the Voters' Choice Act, and many of us were in the room and we were saying, hey, we want to strengthen civic engagement. What's at the most very basic level is voting. Shouldn't we be working on this, especially because Napa is going to be a pilot? And so we began to organize ourselves. We began working with the League of Women Voters, with Asian Law Caucus, and really began to think about how can we engage our communities that are already engaged on other issues on this issue. And so it required us thinking about, what is this Voters' Choice Act? How do we think it should be involved or implemented in our communities? We provided a set of recommendations, numerous recommendations around the election administration's plan, which I never knew prior to this even existed. And so it's been a learning process for all of us around, where do we think vote centers should happen? Where do we think drop boxes should happen? What's going to best engage our young people? What's going to engage our Spanish speakers and our Tagalog Filipino speakers? I've met people that I didn't know before this work, and we have been steadily building a relationship with our voter registrar's office, which we really had not worked with before. We have been able to make some specific changes, or some specific changes have come about as a result of the community's engagement. One of the first proposed things in the election administration's plan was to have the vote centers be located, or the drop boxes be located within government buildings, which had limited hours and low access, frankly, to the audiences that we were serving. And I'm happy to be able to say that there is now the plan to have drop boxes at high traffic areas like Calmart, our local grocery store up in Calistoga, which will have 24-hour access for people. And we've also increased the number of days for the vote center down in American Canyon from 3 to 10. And that is directly as a result of local community residents getting engaged, understanding the system. But I have to say, if they were called to a meeting in the very beginning to talk about the Voters' Choice Act, maybe they wouldn't have come. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting question to think about, is how is it that you spark that interest? And really, I think it drives from where people are feeling in that moment and where they feel like maybe they have the capacity to make a difference. And certainly learning together and having some people who are knowledgeable about these systems help us understand some of the dynamics involved as well has been useful to us. So that's our story. We're still continuing on. We did, receive a grant, and we have a coalition working. We'll be meeting, throughout this year up to June. We, at the end of this month, we have a training that's scheduled 2 trainings. They'll be bilingual and they'll be in different parts of the county. And our communities are helping to lead those trainings with the voter registrar's office so that we can, the purpose of those will be to, again, begin the outreach and begin the education of the wider community about what these changes mean for them. And we certainly hope that many more people are engaged in the voting process as a result of this. I guess the last comment I'll make is that this is so important to us because in our communities, we've been affected by, honestly, the presence of immigration has struck fear into a lot of our families, and I think a distrust of government is present among many. And so, as community-based organizations, we can help people be kind of a source of trust. I mean, we are that trusted place where people come for information, and we want them to understand the value and the importance of being engaged, particularly in times that are so hard for so many. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So we've got a few questions from the audience here. If others have questions, feel free to raise them up. And we have a couple of additional questions that Astrid sent along. So she's here in spirit. Okay, so we're going to start with, I'm going to combine a couple of questions from the audience. And this is, I think, perhaps best targeted to James. Have you asked your boss, have you asked Secretary Padilla to work with major corporations to become vote centers and use their employees as poll centers? Related question is, some people are trying to stop the use of libraries as vote centers, and we need these venues. So your thoughts on what should be a vote center?
The question of what should be a vote center and where they should be and what buildings are appropriate has been left up to each individual county in that community process we've talked about. Where does the community feel like a vote center should be located? What's most comfortable for them to attend to? Maybe it's not a government building, maybe it's the local market. We have seen in other states that do vote centers, have done vote centers for a while, that shop like major grocery chains, do provide locations for drop boxes and vote centers. So hopefully we can get there one day. But I think this first round, counties have relied on past polling places to be their vote centers. But I think as we get more comfortable with the new model, that might happen. I will say though, we have a program called Democracy at Work, and the staff that helps run that program is here. And we partner with them to distribute election information, voter registration information to their customers and their employees. But it's probably a pretty good idea to see which one of our partners can help educate their voters in these Voters' Choice Act counties about becoming a vote center worker, poll worker going forward. And the library is one that's actually been it's interesting development over the past years. In some counties, the libraries are great. They want to be drop boxes. They want to be vote centers. In other counties, the libraries said no, flat out. In other counties, the libraries are gung-ho and they're organizing educational hearings. And I don't know the politics of libraries, so I don't know why that differs from county to county. But I think again, it goes towards, as you look towards adopting the Voters' Choice Act, getting a good lead time and working with those libraries. And then if they're pushing back, okay, well, what's the leverage over those libraries to get them to become polling places? Oftentimes, county supervisors and legislators want to make sure their constituents have access to a vote center or drop box. And so talking to them and working with them to make that happen is an important tactic.
Thank you. So there are a number of questions here that are around a similar topic. As we noted, the Voters' Choice Act is totally optional. Counties get to choose whether or not to participate. So we've got a couple questions here saying, why don't we make it mandatory? What's standing in the way of that? And others saying, how can communities convince their counties to adopt the Voters' Choice Act? How and when should they be doing that?
Now is it on? There we go. So why it's not required is during the legislative process, the legislature wasn't comfortable doing a wholesale switch all at once with all 58 counties. So they wanted to have a smaller number of counties go in 2018 to get a feel, make sure it works, work out the kinks, find improvements. So that's why there's a limited number going in 2018. Why it's overall not required as well is we go back to the limited resources. Is when you require a county to do something, the state has to pay for it. And the state doesn't like to pay for elections. So that's why it's not a mandate on counties to do this. And so that's one of the constant struggles with, that election advocates have and county election officials have, frankly, is when laws do pass that require counties to do something new, it does come with a cost, but they don't get reimbursed that cost. So that's, I think, one of the bigger contexts of why it's not required.
And I think one other factor is that the counties that are going now largely had high vote by mail usage already. So it wasn't a huge leap for them to take this step. I think that with the lower vote by mail counties where people vote by mail less, it's going to be a bigger, a harder jump to make.
And also getting ready for 2020, I wouldn't start with the tactic of putting pressure. I think that the first is to build a relationship with your county election official and find out where they're at, what resources are available to them, what they're thinking about it. Every county is different. Like I said, there's not uniformity in funding to each of the counties, and so they have to deal with that. Make that relationship, find out what your county election official is thinking, and talk with them, have that dialogue before you think about putting pressure and putting leverage on them from higher ups.
So the next question came with some specific questions related to Napa, but I think that this also speaks to a bigger question about how vote centers and drop boxes are being selected in all of the participating counties. So one question specific to Napa is how many vote centers are there going to be in the county? But then I would ask more broadly, how are counties thinking about the distance of centers from one to the next, transportation, et cetera?
Okay, correct me if you know if I'm wrong. I think there's going to be a vote center in every city. It's just a question of whether it's going to be a 3-day or a 10-day. And then in terms of drop boxes, there are additional drop boxes. We were trying to push for more drop boxes than we have. I believe there's around 10. And I don't have the total details on hand, but I think for us, the considerations were we wanted the vote centers to be accessible to people up and down the valley. So we wanted to make sure that, and particularly even in some of our smaller communities like Angwin, which is kind of up in the hills. So we wanted to make sure that that was there, but then also evening hours or weekend hours to make sure that people had the access if they were working. And those were the types of things that we were thinking about. And because American Canyon has such a large population, we felt like a 10-day seemed, it would provide much more access. So
the law itself has a certain algorithm that it uses. There has to be at least one vote center for every 50,000 registered voters as of 88 days before the election. One vote center for every 50,000. So, right. Right. The number of registered voters have to be counted as of E-88. Right. Starting 10 days before the election. Starting 3 days before the election, so 4 days altogether, there has to be a vote center for every 10,000 registered voters as of E-88. And there's a sort of a similar calculation for drop boxes. There has to be one for every 15,000 voters. So that's the floor, but there can be more. And what was interesting about Napa is that they said, okay, that's the floor, but we want more. They said there only has to be one external drop box available, and they said, well, we want the drop boxes to be all external, and we'd like them to be open 24/7, please, instead of just business hours, which is what is required, or 8 hours or 12 hours a day. So the statute sets a floor, the community can push for more. And Napa is really an interesting success story. The community got together and did an enormous amount of advocacy and really achieved a lot.
Also note too that the bill also requires 14 different demographic points to be looked at when looking for the highest need areas for vote centers, whether it's poverty rates, vehicle ownership rates, past voter registration, past voter turnout, and trying to identify key areas where those vote centers should go. Mindy Romero has a great tool that should be launched soon for all 5 counties, where you can look at those identified areas that need vote centers. Sacramento County has a similar map on their website about the math they did to identify high need areas. So I encourage you to look at those.
And actually, we handed out a couple of pieces of collateral. You should have them on your tables that we provided to community members who wanted to get their head around their election administration plans and figure out how to comment on it. One of them is sort of a deep dive, and on the 3rd page, it actually lists the 14 criteria for citing vote centers, things that have to be considered. The other one is a little bit more community-friendly, little easier form that community members can use as they're reviewing their EAP. So you guys have that information if you want it.
Okay, question for James. If counties are required to close gaps and disparities, what happens if they actually create barriers or just fail to do so?
Well, I think that's part of the process here of learning from the Voters' Choice Act. Is there's a lot of requirements upon counties to do outreach into these language minority communities, to voters that traditionally poll voters with disabilities. There's a built-in requirement to do those outreach to those communities that could be affected negatively by this big change. And there's also follow-through. So our office, after each election, is required to do an analysis of the turnout data compared to demographic data and look at and identify some disparities. The counties are then supposed to take those identified disparities and figure out ways to change them. Again, we haven't gone through an election yet, so we don't know what this is going to look like. But we can anticipate there's probably going to be something where we didn't hope to achieve fully what we wanted. And so then going back and looking at, okay, did we do enough community forums in that area? Did we provide enough translated materials to that community? Was there a sufficient number of vote centers in those areas? Drop boxes? Kind of work backwards and see what could we have done more for those communities to make sure that they had better access and turned out at rates we would hope they'd turn out.
Great. One last question from the audience, which is about the same-day registration at the vote centers. A question that these ballots that will be cast by the same-day registrants, will they be provisional? And if so, will they be counted? And if not, why have them do it?
They are similar. They're called conditional ballots.
They're treated similar to a provisional ballot in terms of they go into an envelope. They're processed, during the canvass after, your vote by mail ballots are processed, but they'll be counted. I mean, if the person hasn't been identified as voting twice or already voted, it'll be counted. So.
Be counted. All right. You heard it here. Do you want to ask a question? Sure. Go ahead.
So the question was, what is Black voter turnout percentage in California? It wasn't on my slide. And Mindy's here, right? So the data came from Mindy Romero's work on voting demographics, and you're going to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have, first of all, Black voter turnout is too low. It's low also. It's an issue that we need to address as well. I don't think we have the same statistics on it because of the way statistics are reported on Latinx and Asian American turnout. But if Mindy wants to say something about that. Yeah.
Hopefully you could hear me. if you're interested in data from on African American voter turnout, the source would be current population survey data from the census, and those are available after every election. The difference is you wouldn't want to compare apples to oranges if we're getting into data here, because there are different data sources. So if you look at African American voter turnout from the CPS, you then want to compare it to other groups also from the CPS. Makes sense.
Data guru speaks.
Yes, good call, Dora. Always a good call to call on Mindy Romero. Okay, we do have one final question from the audience, which is the Secretary of State auditing implementation plans before the election?
Our office. No, there we go. Our office is required by the bill to review, to accept, reject, or modify each of the county's education and outreach plans. So as of today, all 5 counties have submitted their plans to us. A couple of counties have had their plans accepted with modifications, meaning we say go back and fix these things in your plan. All of their plans are on our website, voterschoice.sos.ca.gov. There's a button there that says election administration plans. They're all there, and they should all have almost all the translated versions should be on there as well. And I think that again, this is a new process, but I think the county's got to a good place where their plans were meaningful and useful. The letters we did send saying, please modify some stuff was mostly just clarifying some details and some dates. So I think I felt pretty good about how the EAP has turned out. But obviously we want to look forward to how we can improve that and see if there's any, how those plans play out in the field and how they're actually implemented. It will be the next step in examining those plans, the election administration plans, the EAP, another acronym.
All right, so I do have one question that we're going to wrap up this section with, and then we'll have a little bit of closing for the whole conference. And so this is a question for each of you to answer, which is, what is the one thing that you want the audience to take away from this conversation about the Voters' Choice Act? And I'll give you a minute to think about it and start in just noting that the FoCE experience is that the tensions and the challenges that we all experience in collaboration are a really important part of the process. They are always going to be there, and that's the point of us getting together as diverse communities and diverse sectors to work together, and that's all present within the Voters' Choice Act and what's happening in each of the 5 counties. But we firmly believe if we work through these challenges together, we're going to end up with a better product. We're going to end up with more successful implementation. And so tension may exist, but we're all here to work through it together and make a better product as a result. Just takes a second.
Yep. Okay. For me, I feel like what is powerful about the process and what has been meaningful is building the relationship with our community-based partners of all kind of backgrounds, and also the relationship with the voter registrar himself and his office, because we have different lenses that we're coming at it from, but there is a commitment to try to find the best way forward and to understand. And we have regular meetings, and I think that's been useful and helpful. In some way for us, it's allowed us to keep pushing our point, but it's also allowed us to understand some of the challenges or the parameters that he has to work under, and that office has to work under. And I think it just makes us all more informed. So that would be my takeaway.
So it's not exactly, what was the question? Yeah.
What's one thing you want this room to take away?
All right. So what I'm thinking about is not exactly one thing to take away about the VCA, but about the process that we're engaged in. So we talk a lot about how great it is that this law self-consciously works on engaging underrepresented voters. For us, doing that in the field means getting a lot of different groups around the table. Those groups consist of folks who have done a lot of work in their communities, but not necessarily work around elections, and combined with people who have done work around elections. And what often, so even if you get this diverse set of groups sitting around a table and working together to come up with ideas as to how their communities would best be served, the fact of having sort of experts in the room as well sometimes silences the groups whose voices you really want to elevate. And you start thinking about it from the perspective of how can I coach these groups to speak up? We really want to hear their voices. And then you realize, wait a minute, how can I coach myself and the other folks in the room to step back, you know, and allow the space for these people who absolutely have ideas about the significance of this law to their community to step up, you know. So it's a matter of us pulling back, stepping back, and allowing others to step up and creating the space for that. So just in terms of the context of implementation, I think that's just a very important thing that we as experts, activists, voting rights, you know, advocates need to do.
I think to build off that, someone had mentioned on an earlier panel, sort of how do we create a culture of democracy? And I've been peripherally involved in elections for a dozen years, campaigns, legislative and policy. And what I'm seeing in these 5 counties with the hubs, steering committees, I've never seen in elections before, where community groups that they care about elections, they want the people they serve to vote, but actually coming together to discuss where should we put early voting and how do we educate folks about how to use early voting. I've never seen that before. And so I think there's a real, you know, seed that's been planted here that we need to grow. And one of my advice for making sure that seed grows and we can start fostering this in other counties is we need to stop treating each other like jerks, as often I've seen. I mean, that's my observation is we often just bring up the sword and the shield and we go to combat. And that's not how this is going to work. We need to put down our egos. We need to recognize that someone else is bringing something to the table too. They have experience as well. Whether you're an election official, recognize that advocate has been fighting for their community for a long time. If you're an advocate, recognize that election official has been administering elections for a long time, and they take their job seriously. They're a public servant. We need to take down our egos, stop being jerks to each other, and I think live by the motto that I've lived by from one of my favorite quotes from Al Capone. You get more with a gun and a smile than you do with just a gun. So use your strategies and power tactics, but do it with a smile.
Be nice.
Thank you to this excellent panel. Well, Secretary of State Padilla kicked us off this morning by talking about how this is a family reunion every year, and no family reunion would be complete without beer and wine, which is going to be available out in the courtyard. And I hesitate to keep you from said beer and wine. And so I've been noting that I want for everyone to think about one thing that they learned today, something that might inspire you in your work that you're going to take forward with you. And I'm actually going to suggest that we move that conversation outside, that in your conversations with people, introduce yourself to someone, note who you are, and just something new that you learned today. Be a great way to share beer and wine with folks. Before we wrap up, I want to note the contributions of the Conference Planning Committee. Thank you all so much for all of the work that you did to put this together, all of our conference panel leads, the James Irvine Foundation for your support of the organization, and for the staff know if Rachel and Katie are in here, as well as our volunteers. Rosalind is going to bring them in. And while she's getting them, I want to thank, of course, all of you for your participation today. You brought thoughtful conversation to big challenges and opportunities, of course, for modernizing our elections. Our state is large and diverse, and it's really these multi-sector collaborations and conversations that we're having that are going to help us ensure that that we can wrangle this big state of unicorns and rainbows and challenges all together into the state that we want it to be. We hope you'll remain in touch with FoCE throughout the year and with Voters Choice California. And I see Rachel and Katie right there.